This segment is brought to you by Hoosier Hanks East.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio on this Friday. Thank you so much for being with us. Brought to you by Hoosier Hanks East, where you can always find a great time and some great food as well. Joined now by Zach Osterman from the Indy Star. Zachary, how are you doing, sir? How's your week been?
Oh, it's been busy. We're kind of back in that. We're back there now. We're not in the off season anymore. I think it's fair to say.
Nope. It is definitely here, as this weekend actually kicks off college football with a handful of week 0 games. No calories on those, but next Monday, I think I mentioned it earlier. I'm sure that Indiana's routines will change at some point between now and whenever, if it hasn't already morphed to that, to where you're in a game week preparation.
Yeah, a lot of coaches, and we haven't had the chance to ask Signetti about this. Maybe we'll ask him on Monday. A lot of coaches that I've been around in the past have tended to, they have the way everyone seems to want to schedule their fall camps anymore is with these sort of Saturday scrimmages that can basically kind of break up your week, like you're a little bit like getting your team ready for the rhythm of the season in the sense of, your practice during the week, you build up to a scrimmage. Obviously, eventually that, those turn into games. A lot of coaches I've covered have kind of preferred to turn that last Saturday before the first game week into almost like a dress rehearsal. So you aren't just, you may not even scrimmage. Like Tom Allen usually didn't even scrimmage. What he did was, whatever time the game started week 1, they built the whole day around that last scrimmage as though it was the game, in terms of, when everybody got to the facility, when they ate, what they ate, getting, when to get dressed, when to be out on the field, when to do this warm-up versus that warm-up, all those kinds of things, just building all the way through. So you almost like scripting out game day for your players. I don't know if Signetti will do the same thing or maybe something similar, but like I said, a lot of coaches that I have covered have tended to kind of do it that way. And I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow maybe is something similar for Curt Signetti in terms of, as you said, shifting from sort of preseason. Probably already has a little bit. I would be surprised if Indiana hadn't started sprinkling some opponent prep into its practices the last few days at least. But really shifting from, fall camp mode into game week mode.
Yeah, and that is always going to be not a huge change, because I think during the season, does Indiana still practice in the mornings?
Well, they do now. I think they're moving to afternoon practices. I believe they're moving to afternoon practices during the season. That's always built around when guys' class schedules are and just when like the majority of your players have the classes. So if you just wind up in a situation where you have a lot of players with morning classes, then you're kind of compelled to move to the afternoons. I think for the moment, Indiana's practicing in the morning, and that's more common, but I think this year they're going to wind up being in the afternoon.
Yeah, I agree. And looking forward to this season getting started. There are just a handful of games this weekend, and then Indiana will change their preparation towards Florida International as we talk about this change in routine. That will also be a change. Instead of implementation of their schemes, of the offense, of the defense, of going over that, of the personnel, and they've had some personnel changes. And speaking of which, I think it was very fortunate, Zach, for Indiana, although I hate to use the word fortunate and injury in the same sentence. But if you're going to have an injury like they did to, say, Nick Kidwell, it was fortunate that it came with, in essence, plenty of time to work the other guys in and kind of get that going, especially with it being up 2 to 3 guys that they're going to be replacing him with. They have had a couple of weeks up front, and then you still have another week of game prep to go for that. And eventually, I know that it's been 3 people named. I think that'll probably whittle down once someone becomes the apparent leader of that group, maybe. But definitely, it's better than this stuff happening the day before a game.
Well, yeah, obviously, I think. I mean, it doesn't help. I mean, Kidwell was one of the guys that, when you looked at that offensive line, you felt like there were 3 or 4 players that you could look at and Carter Smith, Mike Kadick, Kidwell was one of them. You just sort of said, hey, had to remake it through the portal a little bit, take some transfers, move some guys around. Kadick will be back at center, for example. But you just felt good about basically there's enough guys with experience. You've got a good offensive line coach. Position groups like that, when you have the pieces in place, tend to just sort of work themselves out. There tend to be enough solutions. Taking Kidwell out makes that more complicated. That's not to say Indiana can't fill that hole. I think probably it's probably more accurate to say that Indiana probably can't take more than maybe one other major injury along that line before things start to get a little bit iffy. It'll be interesting to me just to see kind of where they go. You do kind of have, at tackles and center, you've got guys you feel good about in, Carter Smith, Trey Wettig, and then at center, obviously Mike Kadick. We've seen some Drew Evans at guard. We've seen some Bray Lynch at guard. Lynch is a player that I know, multiple coaching staffs now have seen some real potential in as a young lineman. I think he's a redshirt sophomore now, I believe. We've also seen Tyler Stevens brought in from James Madison. He started, I think, at least 6 games in 3 different positions along the line. I think both tackle spots and one of the guard spots. I think he's also been working out a little bit at center. So maybe he did that at James Madison. Forgive me, I'm getting crossed up. But the point is, he can probably be a bit of a swing guy for you that maybe doesn't start because you want to be able to play him in a couple different spots and use him to sort of, spell multiple players. But you get past kind of that group of I guess that's 6 now. You get past that group and you do start to get into, guys that are a lot younger, like Austin Barrett, or even some freshmen, some true freshmen. Barrett's a redshirt freshman. So again, you're not far away from it becoming a problem. And like you said, it's better that it's happened in fall camp when there's still maybe that sort of controlled environment to look for some solutions. And I think coaches are always also, we ask coaches about, who's really showing up for you that you didn't expect, or who's taking a developmental step or whatever. I think coaches often think about it more in terms of, if I had to turn to a guy unexpectedly, who would that be and why? But it's still not ideal for Indiana, and it's probably fair to say they can't afford to take too many more big hits on that line.
Yeah, and that's, while it's unfortunate, that's an area that Indiana will probably have to shore up, because we've seen them. They have depth in the receiver room, in the running backs room, even somewhat in the quarterbacks room. On the defensive side, I'm not exactly sure how deep they go on the line, but offensive line has always been probably a major issue for Indiana, especially when you're talking about competing against the other Big Ten cohorts. It's an area where Indiana has always lacked as far as depth, but I think that will start to change. One of the things that will change when success comes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think, again, this is also where we tend to talk about these things in isolation. like the idea that you have to have a good offensive line to keep your quarterback healthy, and that if you have you have to have a healthy quarterback for your receivers to play well, whatever else. All of this stuff can complement itself if you can build. And if you looked at Signetti's and Mike Shanahan's offenses at James Madison, they had some of this about them. If you can build offenses that are built around, moving the ball quickly, a lot of shotgun, a lot of maybe two-step drop and throw, a lot of 1 and 2 read throws and calls. Well, then you can make life a lot easier on an offensive line. If you're not going to ask an offensive line to block for 4, 5, 6 seconds, then maybe then you simplify the job, or you simplify the task for a young player like a Bray Lynch, who's got some potential but obviously hasn't played a ton of football at this level, or even more if you have to go further down and pull in redshirt freshman, true freshman, whatever. There's a balance that where all this can every piece can complement the other in service of the whole. Not to get overly philosophical, but that's where if you're Indiana, you're not just sort of counting on Bob Bostad, who's got obviously a great track record as an offensive coordinator, as an offensive line coach, but you're also counting on the broader idea that we've talked about in different ways, and I think has been important to Indiana all offseason anyway. The broader idea that Curt Cignetti, Mike Shanahan, they have an established track record of success implementing this offense and taking it forward, and having success with transfer quarterbacks, having success, taking it up a level from FCS to FBS or whatever, having success quickly, turning things around quickly. So, that's how you can kind of help yourself too, is if you can, it's not just about the line will always kind of set the table for things, but there are other elements of the offense that can make life easier for an offensive line that maybe needs, just a little bit, maybe, 4 or 5% more boost now because of a certain injury.
And there's been a lot of, obviously there is a lot of excitement for this season for multiple reasons, while most of the media has remained calm and just saying, all right, well, let's see. I've been not like that. I just have just said, hey, you know what? Here's what I think. I think they're going to be improved. I think this, that, and the other. I just because I can do that, I guess, and not as easier for some other people to do that because it doesn't look as well. But I truly think because of the schedule, because of all the things we talk about, the level of success that could come for Indiana. Even though a few years ago when they had the great run when Kalen DeBoer was here and during that short time after he left, this could still, to me, be a much bigger year because of the schedule, because of the importance of some of these wins. If they're able to go to Los Angeles and beat UCLA in the Rose Bowl, even though this is not the UCLA teams of old or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be something that gets people's attention.
Yeah, I would even go back before that. We're putting together some of our season preview content, and one of the things I kind of highlighted is I do think like one of Tom Allen's probably one of the fair sort of complaints that he had about his IU tenure was something that was outside really anyone in Indiana's control, but was the fact that even in 4 of 6 non-COVID seasons, he had to open with a Big Ten opponent.
Oh, yeah.
And 3 of those 4 were Iowa away and then Ohio State at home twice. So, I don't think I think it gets understated, frankly, a little bit, how much, first of all, it should go without saying, Indiana's got to be able to beat FIU. It's got to be able to beat Western Illinois. If it can't do those things, then we don't need to worry about the rest of the schedule. It's the season from there is just kind of superfluous, and we were all wrong about this team, and et cetera. But especially for a college program where there's turnover in the portal and you've got young guys that you're counting on, and obviously a team like this that's turned over so much of its roster from last season, the idea of having almost like preseason games where you can go out and make some mistakes, you can polish a lot of your rough edges, you can get some young guys some snaps in a more controlled setting where if they make, if they screw up in something, it's probably not the end of the world. It's probably not going to cost anybody anything, at least not anything major. I don't think it's completely by accident, and I'm not trying to ascribe all of Tom Allen's success and failure to this and nothing else, but I don't think it's completely by accident that, Indiana's, what I would argue was Indiana's best season under Tom Allen when you factor for how weird the whole COVID season was in general. I know that the COVID season was better from a result standpoint, but it's certainly, at least in just normal seasons, his best season was that 2019 season. They open with Ball State up in Indianapolis. They make a bunch of mistakes. Michael Penix throws 2 picks. I think Kane Womack came out after the game and said we had something like 15 to 18 missed tackles. That Indiana charted that they felt like they could have knocked 175 yards off of Ball State's total offensive number by the end of the game. But they still win the game comfortably. And I think they're still ahead multiple scores basically the entire game. They don't play particularly well. They win something like 38-28 or 34-24. But they get that warm-up game before they have to dive into anything more difficult. And I don't, we've talked a lot about this schedule, and I think we're right to, you mentioned UCLA, I think we're right to observe that this schedule is a lot easier, at least on paper, than what Indiana's had to navigate for a lot of the last 10 to 12 years in the Big Ten East. But it's also a lot more forgiving at the front end for a coach to be able to tinker and experiment and let his guys make some mistakes and, get all the kind of jitters of early season, get all that nervous energy out, and then move forward from there. I think that those games, there's a world where I think Indiana makes a bowl game this season, and we actually look back at the end of the season at those first 2 games, FIU and Western Illinois, and say those were really important games because Indiana needed to be able to come out and, almost kind of, test drive a lot of its stuff, a lot of its new faces and its scheme and everything against teams where it could make some mistakes and it could identify some flaws in the system, if you want to say, before it had to play anybody in the Big Ten, anybody more difficult, et cetera. This is a weird kind of comparison, but I have a buddy who's in the Air Force and he's in a test flight group. So their job is to take planes up in the air and look for things that go wrong, basically, and try to identify glitches and flaws and get them out of the system before those planes are put into active use, into active duty, I guess you'd say. It's like Indiana gets that for the first time in, when was the last time they didn't open with a Big Ten team?
Because it was actually 5 out of 7 years too.
Well, yeah, I lop off the COVID season because everybody opened with a Big Ten team because they didn't.
Right. But it wasn't just any Big Ten team. It was Penn State.
Yeah, no, I know, but my point is that season was outside everyone's control.
Right.
There was a conscious choice made to hand Indiana those difficult games to start.
Well, I think there's something to that. You looked at an Iowa team that was only Iowa's second Big Ten opener in 29 years, and it had been against Indiana, the last one, ironically, but that stuff's behind them. Off the subject, what do you think happened with Michael Penix in 21? I remember being in Iowa City at Kinnick Field, and the expectations were maybe higher then than they are right now because of that previous season. And man, it just,
I think
you were all watching him going, wait, what's going on here?
I think it was I think it became clear he wasn't really quite ready for the season. And I think he's even kind of admitted that like, I think he said some stuff, last season, obviously got a lot of attention up at Washington. I think he said some stuff basically about like, even doctors kind of told him he wasn't fully there, but he was trying to push through because he wanted to play. Tore his ACL in December. I know we've gotten a lot better at repairing those injuries, but to tear your ACL in early December and be taking meaningful snaps in a Big Ten game 9 months later, like that's not easy. That's not a simple thing to do, especially when it's your second ACL tear. So I think broadly speaking, it was just kind of clear that Penix wasn't quite ready for that season in the way that I think he wanted to be. Obviously, Indiana fans wanted him to be. I think he's kind of. I don't want to go too far out on this limb because I don't have the quote in front of me, but I think he even kind of admitted in some after the fact interview that basically he probably wasn't 100%, but he was trying to push through. He was trying to, get better and as quickly as he could to kind of help his team. And what happened. And I think the other thing that happened with that season more broadly, and I don't think this is a reflection on any one player. I don't think, obviously Penix winds up getting hurt. But people have always asked me, like, kind of how that season's managed to spiral the way that it did. And what I often say is I think Indiana had a roster of guys that just didn't have it in them to go back to the well again. That, they'd come off these two great seasons and they had totally sort of like geared up for this idea of this is going to be, we had all these great moments in 2020, but they weren't in front of fans. We couldn't celebrate them properly. We're going to have that kind of season in 2021. We're going to be one of those teams, in quotes. I'm sure there was at least some belief in competing with Ohio State, and possibly competing to win the Big Ten East. And when suddenly, Indiana, I think, starts 2-3 that season, suddenly the challenge, Penix gets hurt, and the challenge becomes just kind of trying to pull things back together, maybe make a run at a bowl game, get to 6-6, salvage something from the season. I think you just had a roster full of guys that said, "What I already did that." Like that. I came to Indiana to do that, and I did it. I don't know if I've got it in me to sort of reset and try again. So obviously to go from 6-1 the previous season and 8-4 the year before that to 2-10, just talking about regular season results specifically. There's never going to be any one reason why, something like that happens, but I think that was part of it for the team more broadly.
Well, next week, Zach, we will be talking about game prep as it will be one day away. And I want to remind what a huge weekend that's going to be for Indiana athletics as the IU basketball program in general is celebrating with a reunion that weekend. And they will be hosting Jalen Harrelson, one of their top priorities in the upcoming recruiting cycle. And so great weekend to host somebody.
Yeah, well, this is what has changed a little bit with recruiting. You used to bring these guys in and target, like a Hoosier Hysteria or something like that. Now it's like you want to it's like you want each of your top targets to kind of have their own weekend, or if you're targeting a couple guys that are friends, Trent Sisley and Braylon Mullins are scheduled to take their official visits together. But it's almost like you break your season up or your recruiting schedule, your recruiting season, if you want to say that, up into individual weekends where this weekend belongs purely to this one player, so that they and their family get all the attention, all the, everything's built around them rather than the old days. And I think this is one of the reasons we've seen some schools, including Indiana, start to de-emphasize stuff like Hoosier Hysteria. in the old days, you wanted all those kids at Hoosier area together. You wanted to create that sort of collective sense of energy. Now it's much more like this weekend's going to be just for Jalen Harrelson. This weekend's going to be just for Braylon Mullins and Trent Sisley and so forth. And that's been an interesting shift in the way I think schools think about recruiting.
Zach, good luck to your Braves as they are 6 games behind Philadelphia in the National League East. But more importantly, they're actually fighting for a wild card spot, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I don't know where they are exactly, but I think they're still in the playoffs as of today.
I'd say that they take 3 wild card teams, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they have the last wild card spot by a game and a half over Kevin Brockway's New York Mets.
Jim, we need to go to break.
Yeah. Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you, Zach. Have a great weekend, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha, buddy. Thank you. Zach Osterman from the Indy Star.